What if you could remember everything you've ever read, every face you've seen, every number you've learned? Imagine recalling entire books word for word, or memorizing hundreds of random numbers in minutes. Sounds impossible? For journalist Joshua Foer, it began as curiosity and ended with him becoming the U.S. memory champion. In Moonwalking with Einstein, Foer embarks on a year-long quest to uncover the secrets of memory, proving that anyone, even you, can train an extraordinary mind. Chapter 1. The smartest man is hard to find. Joshua Foer's journey begins with curiosity and a sense of wonder. He is a journalist, a regular guy who forgets where he parked his car or leaves his keys in the fridge, someone with an average memory. One day, while researching quirky competitions, he stumbles upon the U.S. Memory Championship, a contest where people memorize decks of cards, random numbers, and poems as if they had photographic minds. Foer arrives expecting to find geniuses or savants, but what he discovers instead changes his understanding of human potential. At the competition, he meets an eccentric mix of contestants, some in suits, others in t-shirts, all with an intense focus on the impossible task of memorizing hundreds of digits in minutes. Among them is Ed Cook, a young British grandmaster of memory, who explains that none of them are born geniuses. They've simply learned to think in more memorable ways. Foer's skepticism turns to fascination when he learns that these memory champions use ancient techniques known as the method of loci, a system of mental imagery that originated in ancient Greece. Ed insists that with practice, anyone can do what they do. The idea sounds outrageous, but Foer can't shake it off. He begins to wonder, what if memory isn't just a natural gift, but a skill that can be trained like a muscle? What would life be like if he could remember everything, every fact, every face, every story? His curiosity sets him on a path that will consume the next year of his life. Foer decides to test the theory for himself, to transform his forgetful mind into a championship-level memory. Chapter 2. The Man Who Remembered Too Much. Before learning how to improve his memory, Foer explores what happens when memory becomes too good. He introduces us to one of the most fascinating minds in psychological history, Solomon Shershevsky, known simply as S. Discovered by the Russian neuropsychologist A.R. Luria, S possessed an almost supernatural memory. He could recall endless lists of words, numbers, and sounds years after hearing them once. His memory defied science. He never seemed to forget. But S's gift was also his curse. He couldn't filter or prioritize information. Every sound, word, or number triggered a flood of sensory experiences, colors, tastes, and textures. A single word could set off an explosion of vivid mental imagery that overwhelmed him. He lived in a world where everything was permanently etched into his mind, and there was no delete button. This condition, called synesthesia, meant that his senses were interwoven. He could taste sounds and see voices. Over time, S's inability to forget made ordinary life unbearable. His world was cluttered with unending details. To survive, he developed elaborate mental techniques, mapping memories onto streets or buildings, much like the ancient memory palaces used by Greek orators. But even with these methods, he could never escape the burden of remembering. Luria's research showed that memory, for all its brilliance, can become a prison when it's absolute. Foer learns from S's story that forgetting is not a flaw. It's essential. Memory must be selective to give meaning to life. This revelation pushes him toward a new goal, not just to memorize, but to understand the deeper balance between remembering and forgetting. Chapter 3. The Expert. Foer turns his attention to the science of expertise. He asks, what separates a world-class performer, whether a chess grandmaster, violinist, or athlete, from everyone else? The answer, he learns, isn't talent. It's deliberate practice. True experts aren't born knowing. They train with structure, focus, and feedback. They don't just repeat what they already do well. They push past comfort, analyzing mistakes, and stretching their limits every single day. In memory training, this principle is the same. The champions' Foer studies aren't extraordinary because they have superhuman brains. They're extraordinary because they practice differently. They break down massive tasks into smaller, specific goals and train their concentration like a muscle. This chapter also explores the cognitive science behind practice. When you focus intensely on improvement, the brain rewires itself, strengthening neural pathways and making skills automatic over time. Foer begins applying these lessons to himself. He learns that memorization is not a rote task, but a creative process, a dance between imagination and discipline. As he practices visualization and association, he starts to see improvement. For the first time, Foer realizes that memory training is not about tricks. It's about transforming how we perceive and organize information. The brain, he concludes, is not fixed, it's trainable. Chapter 4. The Most Forgetful Man in the World. Foer's exploration now turns to the opposite extreme. People who have lost their memory entirely. Through cases like Clive Wearing, a musician who lost the ability to form new memories after brain damage, Foer confronts the horrifying reality of amnesia. Wearing lives in a perpetual present. Every few seconds, he wakes up, unaware of what just happened. He writes the same line in his diary again and again. I am awake for the first time today. These stories reveal that memory is the foundation of identity. Without it, we can't build continuity, learn, or even recognize ourselves. Foer learns that memory doesn't just store facts, it gives life meaning. Our memories are how we build stories about who we are. When memory disappears, so does the self. This chapter grounds Foer's quest in something deeper than competition. He realizes that his project is not merely about learning tricks for recall. It's about understanding what makes memory the core of consciousness. Memory is not just a record of the past. It's the thread that connects us to who we are. Chapter 5. The Memory Palace. At last, Foer learns the most powerful memory technique of all, the ancient method of loci, or memory palace. This system, invented by the Greek poet Summaries of CEOs, uses the brain's natural ability to remember spatial and visual details. The idea is simple but profound. To memorize information, you must turn it into a series of vivid, often absurd images and place them along a familiar mental path, such as the rooms of your house. For example, to memorize a shopping list, you might imagine a giant tomato dripping juice on your couch, a loaf of bread, doing push-ups in your kitchen, or Einstein moonwalking in your hallway, holding a jug of milk. The more exaggerated and bizarre the imagery, the more unforgettable it becomes. This technique harnesses the visual and spatial strengths of the human mind, ancient tools in a modern world drowning in information. Foer begins building his own memory palaces, filling them with surreal, comical, and shocking images to remember lists, poems, and even decks of cards. He finds that by engaging his imagination, he's also training his attention. Each palace becomes a mental playground, a place where memory becomes alive. Through this technique, Foer realizes something profound. Memory isn't about storing lifeless data. It's about transforming information into experience. The memory palace revives the art of remembering as it once existed in ancient times, not as mechanical recall, but as a deeply human act of creativity. Chapter 6. How to Memorize a Poem. Having learned the memory palace technique, Joshua Foer now puts it to practical use. He begins with something simple yet profound, memorizing poetry. He realizes that learning a poem by heart isn't merely about repetition. It's about internalizing rhythm, structure, and imagery. The process forces him to slow down and see language differently. Each line becomes a mental painting. Every metaphor, a door leading to another image. As he works through the verses, Foer learns that memorization transforms the act of reading. Instead of passively consuming words, he becomes part of them. The process connects him emotionally to the poet's thoughts. He understands that memorizing is not mechanical, it's interpretive. To remember, one must first understand deeply. He builds elaborate visual cues in his memory palace to anchor each line, imagining bizarre, funny, or vivid scenes that embody the poem's essence. This experiment reshapes Foer's perception of what it means to know something. When a poem is truly memorized, it's no longer on paper. It lives inside you, accessible anytime. He realizes that memorization is a way of preserving ideas not for performance, but for reflection. It's how generations once internalized wisdom long before books or Google. Memorizing poetry, for Foer, becomes both a mental exercise and a philosophical act, an antidote to forgetfulness in a distracted world. Chapter 7. The End of Remembering. Foer reflects on how our relationship with memory has changed in the modern age. Once, human beings carried their knowledge internally. Stories, facts, and history were passed through oral traditions. But with the invention of writing, and later the printing press and digital technology, memory began to move outside the brain. We began to rely on books, computers, and smartphones as external storage systems. He asks a haunting question. If memory defines who we are, what happens when we stop using it? Our tools of convenience, Google, social media, search engines, have made it unnecessary to remember. We no longer memorize phone numbers, addresses, or even directions. Information is everywhere, yet personal understanding is vanishing. Foer argues that this outsourcing of memory has fundamentally altered our minds. We are surrounded by information, but starved for meaning. Remembering something forces us to engage with it, to process, connect, and make it personal. Forgetting, in turn, becomes easier when we rely on technology to hold our knowledge. The more we externalize memory, the less we internalize life itself. He concludes that memory isn't just about storage, it's about attention. To remember is to care, to focus, to give something enough of yourself that it becomes part of who you are. Forgetting everything may make life easier, but it also makes it shallower. The end of remembering isn't just a cultural shift, it's a human loss. Chapter 8. The OK Plateau. During his intense training, Foer encounters a frustrating obstacle. His progress halts. No matter how much he practices, he can't seem to improve. This stagnation is what psychologists call the OK Plateau, the stage where learning plateaus because performance becomes automatic. When you first learn to type or drive, you focus intensely on improvement. But once you reach good enough, your brain stops adapting. You're no longer learning, you're coasting. To break through the plateau, Foer studies how experts in every field continue improving. The secret is deliberate practice, pushing beyond comfort zones, analyzing mistakes, and constantly challenging the mind. Chess masters replay lost games, athletes watch their own failures, and musicians practice pieces they can't yet play. The key is never allowing performance to become mindless. Foer begins to record his own training sessions, timing his recall, measuring his progress, and scrutinizing his weak points. He learns to focus not on what he does right, but on what he does wrong. By consciously pushing past the point of ease, he reactivates learning. Slowly, his memory skills begin to improve again. The lesson of this chapter extends beyond memory competitions. It's about mastery in life. Growth happens not when we're comfortable, but when we deliberately step into discomfort. The OK Plateau is a reminder that excellence requires awareness, struggle, and the courage to stay a beginner. Chapter 9. The Talented Tenth. Foer explores the myth of innate genius. He examines historical examples of prodigies, Mozart, Picasso, and mathematical savants, and learns that their brilliance, though extraordinary, was nurtured through relentless effort. Even the most gifted individuals spend thousands of hours honing their craft. What sets them apart is not just talent. It's persistence, structure, and passion. In the world of memory, the same principle applies. Every mental athlete he meets insists that their skills are learned, not born. The brain, it turns out, is highly trainable. Foer studies research showing that expertise is a result of long-term, goal-directed practice, not divine blessing. He calls this idea the democracy of genius. It means that mastery is available to anyone willing to dedicate themselves fully. This realization transforms Foer's motivation. Instead of seeing memory champions as genetic anomalies, he begins to see them as proof of human adaptability. He commits himself to becoming part of this talented 10th, not because he's exceptional, but because he believes in the power of training. Memory, he now knows, is the great equalizer. With the right techniques, an average brain can do extraordinary things. Chapter 10. The Little Rain Man in All of Us. Foer's next exploration delves into the mysterious world of savant syndrome, cases where individuals with developmental disorders possess astonishing mental abilities. He learns about people who can instantly calculate massive numbers, recall entire books, or play complex pieces of music after hearing them once. One example, famously portrayed in the film Rain Man, shows how savants have hyperspecific cognitive wiring that allows for incredible feats of memory or pattern recognition. But Foer also learns that the savant brain isn't necessarily smarter. It's simply more focused. These individuals often lack the filters that most people have, filters that block out irrelevant details. By studying them, scientists have discovered that the brain's potential for memory and detail exists in all of us, only dormant. The difference is that our brains are wired to generalize and forget, to prioritize meaning over minutiae. Foer realizes that savants aren't superhuman. They're extreme examples of what the human mind can do when memory operates without filters. In a sense, there's a little Rain Man inside each of us, capable of remarkable recall if properly trained. The challenge is to awaken that potential without losing the balance that makes memory useful. Through his own experiments, Foer begins to feel this potential emerging within himself. Chapter 11. The U.S. Memory Championship. After a year of training, Joshua Foer finally steps back into the arena that started it all, the U.S. Memory Championship. This time, he's not a journalist observing from the sidelines. He's a competitor. The once skeptical reporter now faces off against some of the best mental athletes in America. The atmosphere is tense. Silence fills the hall as competitors don earmuffs and eye masks to shut out distractions. Foer uses every trick he's learned: the memory palace, bizarre imagery, and focused visualization. Cards, numbers, and faces blur through his mind like a cinematic sequence of symbols and scenes. Each image he's created, the moonwalking Einstein, the dancing bread loaf, the flying banana, anchors a piece of information in place. As the rounds progress, Foer surprises himself. His recall is precise, his concentration unbreakable. And when the final challenge ends, the unthinkable happens. He wins. Joshua Foer, the man who once called himself Forgetful, becomes the U.S. memory champion. But the victory isn't the true reward. What Foer gains is understanding. His year of training taught him that memory is more than a competition. It's a window into human potential. Memory shapes identity, fuels creativity, and deepens experience. By learning to remember, he has learned to pay attention. The championship may end in applause, but the journey leaves him transformed, aware that the mind is far more capable and more mysterious than he ever imagined. Epilogue. Foer reflects on what he's learned. The purpose of memory isn't to hoard information. It's to enrich experience. Remembering deepens living. Forgetting gives space for meaning. The art of memory, he concludes, isn't just about contests or tricks. It's about reclaiming attention in a distracted age. To remember, we must first learn to notice. Moonwalking with Einstein is more than a story about memorization. It's a meditation on learning, focus, and what it means to be human in a forgetful world. Through humor, science, and personal transformation, Joshua Foer reminds us that memory is not a fixed gift, but a skill that can be cultivated, and that by sharpening it, we rediscover the full richness of our own minds.